Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and finally getting around to sharing with you guys something that's been very highly requested, which is these Gansai Tambi gem watercolor set that I showed in a haul video whenever, quite some time ago, and I haven't had a chance to use them yet, so I pulled them out. And I also pulled out another kind of oldie but goodie favorite of mine, the Simon Says Stamp Floral Bliss stamp set. So I have some black cardstock here, and I'm using my stamp platform. And I used my anti-static powder tool on the black cardstock first. And then I'm inking up this large image with Simon's clear embossing ink. And then I'm coating it with Simon's silver embossing powder. Then I'm going to melt this with my heat tool. And once that's melted and had a couple seconds to cool off, I'm going to stamp the image again to make it look like one large, kind of cluster. So rather than mask off the bottom portion, I'm just going to stamp right over it, and I'm just going to brush off any of the areas that overlap. So to kind of minimize getting any of that embossing ink where I don't want it on the black cardstock, I'm just using the back of the stamp packaging here. I've shown this in other videos recently. So this way I can kind of move that stamp around, get it where I want it. It's not touching the cardstock yet. And then once I have it on the lid of my stamp platform, I can use a little more anti-static powder here, ink up the stamp again with that clear embossing ink, and then I'm going to stamp it onto the black cardstock. And then after I coat this with the silver embossing powder, I can see all the little areas that they overlap. You could almost leave it as is if you didn't want to take this extra step, but one, it doesn't take very long, and two, I think it just gives it that little bit of a cleaner look, but just the style of image. And I am going to add a sentiment in the middle anyway. You could skip this step of just using the paintbrush, but I'm just using a dry paintbrush and just brushing away the areas that have overlapped the first stamping there. And then I'm just going to melt this with my heat tool. So at this point, after everything was melted, my camera battery died. So I changed it. And then I thought I was filming the first little bit, and I realized I hadn't actually pressed the button. So what I had done was I had sprayed some water into all of these watercolors. These work best if you add a bit of water and then work it up a bit with your brush first. If you have a wet brush and you just touch them, just like all the other Gansai Tambi watercolors, whether they be the shimmery ones or the regular ones, I find they work best if you get them wet first. So that's what I did with these. I sprayed them with water. I let them sit for a little bit to kind of let the water soak in a bit. And then I work it up with my brush. And then this way you can see I'm just able to touch my brush to it, and it's all creamy and the color just picks up like a dream. And then when I'm done using it, I just let it sit out to dry, and then I put it back in the packaging and put it away. So these work just like all the other ones. I've shown videos using the Starry Color set. I have the pastel set. I can't even remember if I've used it. I think I've used it a couple times. These work the exact same. They're really pretty. If you take the color out, like if you work it on your brush and put it on a palette, you will see that the shimmery particles in these watercolors will settle to the bottom. I don't have a problem with that when I just leave it just like I'm showing here, and just, picking directly up from the little watercolor cakes. I find this works just fine. But if I ever add anything to a palette and want to mix from there, you will have to kind of keep working it up with your brush. These, again, because they are shimmery ones, they look much better on dark cardstock like this. This is just black cardstock. It's not anything like, special watercolor paper or anything, just standard black cardstock. And again, I've shown videos doing this with other shimmery watercolors, but I love doing this because all you have to do is paint the color on. I'm not adding too much water. I'm not doing any blending or anything. So one, the cardstock can handle this. It's not going to warp it too much or, make it pill or anything. And two, you don't need any special, experience or time to practice or anything. You literally just need to pick up the color and paint it on. So anybody can do this. This is gives you such a bang for your time and your buck and everything. And yet, yeah, I could do cards like this all day, every day. I absolutely love how this ends up looking, just that shimmery look on the black cardstock. And the fact that I don't have to worry about doing anything super special, with shading or blending or, it's just something that anybody can do, because I know watercoloring can be extremely intimidating. When I first started, and I still am sometimes, I get overwhelmed with like how much work it can be and, you know, to get the end result and whatnot. Whereas this, it's like you just sit down, add the color, it's done. So I used every single color from this palette on here because I wanted to see how they looked, and they all look gorgeous on black cardstock. The gold is really just, I think, my favorite. But then I'm just partial to anything like gold. I just love it on cards. So, of course, I use the gold just mostly for the like centers of the flowers and whatnot, and that wasn't enough for me. So one, I let everything dry, and I should have done this before I started watercoloring, but I was so excited to like play with the colors, I didn't even think about it. But I made sure everything was dry, and I took a Swiffer cloth and wiped away all that excess anti-static powder. I recommend doing that before you start coloring, but I was having fun. I was able to remove it anyway, but everything is dry. I removed the excess powder, and then I took some of that gold and I just put it on an acrylic block, and then I just flicked my paintbrush against the acrylic block to create a bit of gold splatter because I had to bring in more of that gold. So I'm just splattering that along, and the brush I'm using is just a Royal and Langnickel Zen 4 brush. That's another thing with these. You don't need, you know, a fancy watercolor brush, you know, any of the more expensive ones. Like this is just a cheap brush that works really well. I really like these Zen brushes. So again, I let that splatter dry, and then I'm going to die cut this with the largest of the Simon stitched rectangle wafer dies. And then I pulled out the Simon Says Stamped CZ Design Hello dies, and I had the largest one, and I die cut some magenta glitter paper with it, as well as some black cardstock. And then I also grabbed a scrap of the black cardstock, and I'm stamping a sentiment from the CZ Design Hello You stamp set onto the black cardstock with that clear embossing ink. And I'm going to heat emboss it with that same silver embossing powder. So same set of steps, anti-static powder, stamp the sentiment, coat it with the silver embossing powder, melt that with my heat tool, and then remove the anti-static powder after everything's cooled off with my Swiffer cloth there. And then I'm going to trim that down into a narrow little strip with my Tim Holtz paper trimmer. And then once I've got that trimmed down, I'm going to stack all those die cut hellos with my multi-medium matte adhesive. So I have 3 of them that I die cut from black cardstock. And I'm just going to stack those all together by just running that multi-medium matte adhesive on each layer. Stack on the second, then the third, etc. And then once I get to my last layer, I'm going to add the adhesive and then adhere the glitter die cut on the very top of this. And it just, oh, this glitter paper just makes me happy. So I've got this all finished and stacked, and then I'm going to add adhesive to the back of this, and I'm going to adhere it to my card. And this is what I was talking about in the beginning, saying you don't need to brush off the embossing powder in the beginning if you're just going to be adhering a sentiment over it. But I did it because I'm a little bit OCD and just because I could. So I adhered that die cut sentiment, and then I put acrylic blocks over it to really press it into the cardstock so that it will adhere flat over that heat embossing. And I added more of that multi-medium matte adhesive to the little narrow strips so that it will stick really well to that glitter paper, and just stuck that on top of the die cut sentiment, stacked on my acrylic blocks, and let it sit for a few minutes to dry. And then my card base is some Simon Fog cardstock, cut to 4 1/4 by 11 inches. So I'm going to score that at 5 1/2, so it'll be a top folding A2 sized card. And I am going to stamp the inside of the card with that large floral image. So I'm putting it back in my stamp platform, and I'm going to ink up the image with Simon's Fog ink so that it just shows up. I find really light cardstocks like this, the clear, either clear embossing ink or Versamark ink doesn't show up very well by the time it dries. The cardstock's just too light. So I inked it up with the Fog ink, and then I had stamped and embossed a sentiment from the CZ Design Simple Sentiments #1. I love this one. I miss your face. So I had stamped and embossed that onto a strip of black cardstock with that same silver embossing powder. I'm just going to adhere that to the inside of the card with that same adhesive, and then I'm just going to flip this over so I can see the back of the card and trim off the bits of cardstock that kind of hang over the edge. And then to adhere my front panel here, I'm going to use the Simon Big Mama foam tape, which I have been using constantly. I think I love that it's just thinner than standard foam tape, so I can add, you know, that little bit of extra dimension without too much bulk. So I added strips of that to the back of this panel. I'm going to peel off the backing and I'm going to adhere this to my card base. And then once that's adhered, I had to add a final little bit of embellishment. So I pulled out some Studio Caudia silver crystals here. These are the silver foil crystals, and I'm just obsessed with them. I think I've used up like half a package already. I want to add them to everything. So I picked out a few of them and kind of sprinkled them rather liberally on my card front here. And then once I've got them in place, I'm just going to use my jewel picker to pick them up and then adhere them into place with that multi-medium matte adhesive. And that's going to finish off my card. So if you're interested in any of the supplies used, I will have links below the video in the description box to all of the supplies. I will also have a link to my blog post that will have picture links to the supplies as well as all the pictures, etc. So you can check that out below if you are interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.